Hello there. Thank you for being here tonight. Maybe it's late where you are. Maybe the day is still holding on a little. Either way, you're here now, and that's enough. Tonight we're entering an ancient story preserved in the earliest Sumerian texts. A story about the Anunnaki, and how power, lineage, and authority may have begun long before human kings ever ruled openly. You didn't need to choose anything special. You didn't need to prepare. This moment found you on its own. Perhaps you're listening from a quiet room, or a place you sit in often. Maybe you're lying down. Maybe you're just resting your eyes for a while. However it is, there's nothing you need to fix. Before we go any further, let me ask you something simple. Where are you listening from tonight? What does the air feel like around you? Warm? Cool? Still? Is there a sound nearby? Or has the world gone quiet for a moment? You don't need to answer, just notice. Because the story we're drifting toward begins with noticing too. Noticing effort. Noticing repetition. Noticing that order always seems to belong to someone else. Long ago, before history was written the way we know it now, people tried to understand why life felt arranged, why some people gave commands, why others followed them, why work never truly ended, and why authority always felt older than anyone alive. These questions weren't asked loudly, they were asked quietly, while working the land, while watching rivers rise and fall, while living inside systems that felt already decided. So people told stories, not to entertain, not to frighten, but to explain the world they were already living in. Some of those stories were pressed into clay, slowly, carefully, with hands that understood memory could fade. Today those tablets survive only in fragments, broken edges, missing lines, words that stop just before they finish the thought, but one idea returns, again and again, that humanity was not always meant to govern itself, that before kings ruled openly, there were others who planned how order would function, who organised labour, who maintained balance. The texts call them the Anunnaki. They are not described as monsters. They are not described as heroes. They appear as managers of structure, concerned with stability, concerned with continuity. And at some point in these stories something changes. The tablets begin to speak of a group created to rule, not fully divine, not fully human, something in between, a hybrid lineage just meant to carry authority forward. Why create such beings? Why mix divine essence with human form? What problem was this meant to solve, and what did it quietly set into motion instead? The words describing this are calm, almost plain. There is no warning written into the story, no sense that a boundary has been broken. Some read these stories as symbols, others wonder if they preserve older memories instead. We don't need to decide tonight. This is simply a story about what the Sumerian texts describe, about where power may have come from, and why authority can feel inherited, rather than chosen. Now, let's settle in just a little. Feel where your body is supported. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breath slow on its own. That's all. Because the world we're about to step into moved slowly too. Before rulers, before cities, before names, there was land, wide and open, rivers moving at their own pace, the sky stretching endlessly above it all. No commands yet, no thrones, no crowns, just patience. And from that patience, something begins to take shape, not suddenly, not loudly, quietly. And as the night continues around you, we'll begin to explore how that quiet world slowly shaped power, and how humanity came to live beneath a system that already felt ancient, even at the very beginning. Long before anyone ruled, the land already knew how to move. Rivers flowed without being guided. Water spread, then pulled back. The ground darkened, dried, and darkened again. Nothing hurried, nothing waited. Imagine standing there before sunrise. The air is cool and heavy. The ground beneath your feet feels firm, slightly damp. There are no paths yet, no borders, just open land stretching in every direction, shaped slowly by water and time. This is the world before authority, before commands were given, before obedience was expected, before power had a name. The Sumerian texts hint at this time quietly. They don't describe chaos. They don't describe peace either. They describe balance that comes and goes. Floods arrive when they will. Crops grow when timing is right. Survival depends on attention rather than control. People live close to the land here, not as owners, as participants. Work exists, but it follows the rhythm of nature rather than rules. Planting happens when the soil feels ready. Movement follows water. Memory is carried in the body more than in words. Perhaps life feels lighter in some ways. Perhaps it feels uncertain in others. At night the sky opens wide. Stars feel close, almost within reach. The same stars return again and again, marking time long before calendars exist. People notice patterns without needing to name them. The sky does not command, it repeats. Silence plays a role here. Long stretches without speech. Listening becomes necessary. The wind moves across grass. Insects hum softly. The land speaks through change rather than instruction. There is no centre yet. No city pulling people inward. No authority standing above. No system asking to be maintained. This openness carries freedom, but also risk. When floods come at the wrong time, there is loss. When water lingers too long, disease spreads. When it leaves too early, hunger follows. Balance exists, but it is fragile. Perhaps this fragility is what leads to observation. Watching closely, remembering what worked, trying again. Knowledge begins to form quietly, without structure. Imagine a group gathered near the river at dusk. The water reflects fading light. Someone gestures toward where the bank broke last season. Another remembers where crops survived longer. No one commands. Agreement forms slowly. This is cooperation before leadership. The Sumerian texts do not praise this time or condemn it. They simply acknowledge it as a phase, a world where survival depends on awareness rather than control. But awareness alone cannot hold against repetition forever. Floods return, loss repeats, memory fades when people move or die. Without something fixed, lessons must be learned again and again. Perhaps this is where pressure begins to build, not from fear, from repetition. When the same mistakes return, people look for stability. When loss repeats, memory feels insufficient. Something stronger than recollection is needed. The land continues its cycles regardless. Rivers do not adjust themselves for human effort. The sky remains steady, indifferent. At some point, attention turns outward, not just to the land, but to the patterns behind it. Why does water move this way? Why does the sky return the same signs? Why does effort sometimes fail even when it feels correct? These questions are not written yet. They are felt. Perhaps this is when the idea of order begins to form, not imposed, imagined. The Sumerian texts suggest that before power arrived, understanding was scattered, useful, but unprotected. Knowledge lived inside people rather than beyond them. When people died, memory went with them. The land did not care. Silence returns often in this world. Long pauses between seasons. Long nights under open sky. Nothing demands explanation yet, but change is coming. Because repetition creates desire for control. And control requires structure. The rivers continue to move. The sky continues to turn. From their perspective, nothing is missing. But for the people living here, something begins to feel incomplete. Not wrong, not broken, just unstable. This is the soil where power will grow. Not suddenly, not violently, but slowly. As the night deepens around you, imagine this world resting exactly as it is. Open, quiet, unorganized. A place where life moves freely, but not safely. From this openness, something new will soon emerge. Not as conquest, not as command, but as an answer to repetition. And as the land continues its patient breathing beneath the stars, the idea of order, still unnamed, still unformed, waits quietly, preparing to take shape. Change doesn't arrive all at once. It builds quietly, through small moments that repeat until they begin to feel heavy. The Sumerian texts suggest that order did not come from ambition, but from weariness. Not exhaustion of the body, but exhaustion of starting over. Imagine another season passing. The river rises again. The water spreads farther than expected. Fields disappear beneath it. When the water pulls back, the soil is rich, but boundaries are gone. Everything must be decided again. Where to plant, where to build, where to avoid. People remember what worked before, but memory alone isn't enough. It shifts, it fades, it argues with itself. Perhaps this is when agreement becomes difficult. One person remembers the flood reaching higher, another remembers it stopping sooner. Both are certain, neither can prove it. Decisions feel uncertain before they are even made. The land does not wait, water returns when it will. The sky repeats its signs, the seasons move forward without pause. This repetition presses gently but constantly. It asks for something steadier than recollection, something that can hold memory in place. The idea of order begins to feel useful. Not power yet, not control, just consistency. Imagine someone marking the ground with a stone, not as ownership, as reminder. This flood reached here. This place held firm. This path stayed dry longer. The mark is simple, but it lasts longer than memory. Others notice. They remember too. Slowly, patterns are shared. Agreements form more quickly. Decisions feel less fragile. The same choices don't have to be made again and again. This is order in its earliest form. The Sumerian texts describe this shift without naming it directly. They show people beginning to organize around repeated success. Certain ways of doing things last longer. Certain voices are listened to more closely, not because they demand attention, but because outcomes follow. Leadership begins to form quietly, not announced, not declared, recognized. Imagine a gathering near the river. Someone speaks, others nod. The choice is made, no command is given, no resistance offered. The decision simply feels right. This feeling matters. Once people begin to trust patterns, they begin to trust those who recognize them. Authority grows out of familiarity rather than force, but familiarity has limits. As communities grow larger, agreement becomes harder, more voices, more memories, more interpretations. What once worked for a small group becomes harder to apply widely. The land remains the same, the river remains patient, the sky continues its slow turning. But human groups expand. Perhaps this is when the need for structure becomes clear. Not just suggestions, not just shared memory, something more fixed, something that lasts beyond one person's experience. The Sumerian texts hint at this pressure building. They do not describe conflict yet. They describe complexity. More people, more work, more coordination required. Tasks must be divided. Water must be managed. Storage must be protected. Someone must decide who does what and when. Order begins to ask for authority. Not because people desire to rule, but because systems need maintenance. Imagine a canal dug carefully one season, then left unattended the next. Silt builds up. Water spills. The work must be done again. Without someone responsible, effort scatters. Responsibility needs a place to rest. This is where structure starts to harden. Certain roles repeat. Certain people are trusted to oversee. Others accept this because it works. Life feels slightly easier when someone is accountable. The Sumerian texts do not frame this as loss of freedom. They frame it as adaptation. Freedom remains, but it is shared with responsibility. The sky above continues unchanged. Stars rise and set as they always have. From that scale, human organization is invisible. But on the ground, something important has shifted. Order is no longer temporary. It is expected. Once order is expected, deviation becomes noticeable. Mistakes feel heavier. Failure feels personal. The system now has a shape, and that shape can be damaged. Perhaps this is when the idea of guardianship begins. Someone must protect the system. Someone must ensure that order continues even when others are tired, distracted, or gone. This role is not yet a ruler, it is a caretaker. The Sumerian texts describe beings who take on this role early, not human yet, not distant gods either. Figures associated with planning, instruction, and system design. They appear not to dominate, but to organize. The land continues to breathe, the river continues to move, the sky remains vast. But within human life, order now matters, not as control, as survival. And once order matters, the question of who maintains it cannot be avoided. The story does not rush here. It lets this pressure build slowly. It allows necessity to shape the path forward. As the night deepens around you, imagine this moment resting in balance. A world no longer entirely free, but not yet ruled. a world where order has become valuable, but power has not yet taken form. From this quiet need, something more deliberate will soon emerge, not as force, not as conquest, but as design. And as the land continues its steady rhythm beneath the stars, the idea of authority, still unnamed, still forming, waits patiently, ready to step forward when repetition finally demands it. Word count: 50. The change feels gentle at first. Nothing is taken away. Nothing is forced. The land continues as it always has. Rivers rise and fall. The sky turns slowly overhead. But now some decisions last longer than a season. Some choices shape the next year instead of disappearing with the last. Imagine standing near the river again, but this time the banks look slightly different. The water is guided, not trapped, just encouraged to move where it causes less harm. Someone has remembered where it breaks through most often. Someone has adjusted the edge. This adjustment holds. People notice. The Sumerian texts describe figures who begin to appear during this phase. They are not kings yet. They do not wear crowns. They are planners, organisers, beings associated with instruction rather than command. They don't shout. They don't threaten. They explain. Their role is not to work the land directly, but to decide how work should happen. They watch patterns, they remember outcomes, they suggest changes that reduce loss, and those changes work. Perhaps that is why people listen. These figures are described as being different, not because they look unusual, but because they operate differently. They think beyond the immediate task. They consider the whole system, where water should flow, when work should begin, how effort can last longer. The texts later call them Anunnaki, but here they are simply present. Not distant, not worshipped, just involved. Imagine one of them standing quietly while others work. The sun is high. The air is warm. They are not lifting tools. They are watching timing. They speak only when needed. Their words carry weight because results follow. This is important. Authority does not begin with force. It begins with effectiveness. The land responds well to planning. Canals last longer. Fields recover faster. Loss still happens, but less often. When it does, recovery is quicker. Order feels helpful now. People begin to rely on these planners, not out of fear, out of trust. Decisions feel safer when guided by someone who sees further. This reliance grows slowly. At first, advice is optional, then expected. Eventually, it becomes standard. Certain tasks are no longer done without guidance. Certain choices wait for approval. No one announces this shift. It simply happens. The Sumerian texts remain calm here. They do not describe resistance. They do not describe conflict. They show a system forming because it reduces effort. But every system creates distance. The planners do not work the land directly. They do not feel the strain in their bodies the same way others do. Their role separates them slightly. This separation is not negative yet. It allows focus, but it is noticeable. Imagine someone working all day in the field, then watching decisions made from the shade. There is no anger, just awareness. The planners begin to meet among themselves. They compare observations. They refine methods. Order becomes less personal and more structured. The land benefits. The sky continues unchanged. Stars return to familiar positions. From that scale, nothing has shifted. But on the ground, organization deepens. Responsibility concentrates. The planners begin to define roles. Who does what? When work begins, where effort is needed most. These decisions affect many people at once. This is new. Previously, agreement formed locally. Now decisions reach further. They hold longer. Mistakes also spread wider. But the system still works. Perhaps this is why no one questions it yet. The Sumerian texts suggest that these planners do not belong fully to the people. They are separate but not distant, present but not equal. Their authority comes from knowledge rather than strength. This distinction matters. Once authority rests on understanding, it becomes harder to challenge. If a decision fails, it is adjusted quietly. If it succeeds, trust deepens. Over time, planning becomes governance, not suddenly, not dramatically, gradually. The planners begin to decide not just how work is done, but who oversees it. Certain individuals are chosen to carry responsibility forward. Memory is passed intentionally rather than accidentally. Lineage begins to matter here. even if it is not yet named. The Anunnaki are not described as rulers at this stage. They are architects of order, designers of systems meant to outlast individuals. Perhaps this is why later texts remember them as creators rather than conquerors. The land continues its cycles. The river moves patiently. The sky remains vast. But within human life, something has shifted permanently. Order now has caretakers, and caretakers shape the future. As the night continues quietly around you, imagine this world settling into its new rhythm. Less uncertain, more organised. Still human, but guided. From this guidance, something else will soon emerge. Because once planning becomes central, the question of who plans and who does not can no longer be ignored. And from that question, power will slowly take form. Authority does not arrive with ceremony. It grows from habit. At first, the planners only guide work. They suggest when to begin. They advise where effort will last longest. People follow because it helps. Life feels a little steadier. Loss becomes less frequent. Recovery becomes easier. Over time, these suggestions stop being suggestions. They become expectation. Imagine returning to the fields one morning and realizing that work no longer begins until guidance is given. No one says this out loud. It is simply understood. Waiting feels safer than deciding alone. This is how authority settles in. The Sumerian texts describe this moment carefully. They do not frame it as domination. They show it as efficiency. When systems grow larger, coordination must tighten. Someone must decide first. The planners begin to formalize their role. They meet more often. They record outcomes. They preserve methods that work. Knowledge becomes organized. Authority follows. The planners no longer rely only on observation. They rely on record. Clay tablets appear, marked with lines that track time, work, and results. Memory is placed outside the body. This changes everything. Once knowledge is recorded, it belongs to those who can read it. Interpretation becomes power. Decisions become less visible, more abstract. The planners now shape the system without needing to be present everywhere. This distance matters. Imagine someone following an instruction written days earlier by someone they have never met. The instruction feels final. There is no discussion. The authority is no longer personal. It is structural. The text suggests that the planners are aware of this shift. They do not reverse it. They refine it. Order becomes layered. Those closest to the planners understand the system best. They learn how decisions are made. Others follow outcomes rather than reasoning. This separation deepens. The planners are no longer simply guides. They are governors of structure. Their role now affects not just work, but status. Who leads? Who obeys? Who inherits responsibility? Lineage begins to form here. Not bloodline yet. Function line. Certain families or groups are chosen to carry planning roles forward. Knowledge is passed intentionally. Authority becomes inherited through training rather than chance. But inheritance always invites permanence. The land continues its cycles. The river moves as it always has. The sky remains unchanged. From that scale, human organization is brief, but within society the structure feels solid. Perhaps this solidity brings comfort. Knowing who decides removes uncertainty. Knowing where authority rests simplifies life. Responsibility feels distributed rather than scattered. The Sumerian texts do not criticize this phase. They show it as solution, but solutions carry limits. As authority concentrates, distance grows. Those who decide feel less of the daily strain. Those who work feel less involved in decision-making. This gap is not hostile yet. It is quiet. Imagine someone noticing that they no longer understand why certain rules exist. They follow them because they work, not because they were part of choosing them. Understanding fades. Compliance remains. The planners continue refining systems. They do not notice this change immediately. From their perspective, order is improving. Loss is minimized. Productivity rises. The system appears successful. Perhaps this is why the next step feels reasonable. If authority works best when it is stable, then stability must be preserved beyond individual lives. Knowledge must be protected. Roles must continue without disruption. This is where design turns toward permanence. The planners begin to consider succession, not just who is capable now, but who will be capable later. How authority can survive death without fracture. The answer is continuity. Authority must belong to something more durable than individual memory. The texts grow quieter here. They do not explain the mechanism yet. They prepare the ground. The land remains patient. The sky watches. The river continues its steady path. And within the structure of human society, authority, once helpful, now essential, begins to seek a form that cannot be easily challenged, forgotten, or undone. From this need, something new will emerge, not just rulers, but a ruling class. And as the night continues to soften around you, the story moves gently forward, toward the moment when planning becomes power, power becomes inheritance, and authority begins to separate itself from those it governs. The shift does not feel sudden. It feels reasonable. By the time authority begins to think about permanence, the system is already complex. Work is organized, knowledge is recorded, decisions affect many people at once. Too much depends on continuity for authority to be left to chance. Imagine standing near the edge of a settlement at dusk. The work is done for the day. Fires begin to glow softly. People move with routine ease. The system works, and because it works, preserving it feels important. This is where separation begins. The Sumerian texts suggest that the planners start to distinguish themselves more clearly, not through force, through definition. Roles become fixed, access becomes limited. Certain knowledge is no longer shared freely. This is not described as secrecy. It is described as protection. Order must be guarded from disruption. Decisions must be insulated from confusion. Authority must be preserved from error. Perhaps this is why a separate line is chosen. The texts speak of beings who are not entirely like those they govern, a class set apart. Not distant gods, but not ordinary humans either. Their difference is not dramatic. It is structural. They're closer to origin. This closeness matters. Imagine a group taught not only how the system works, but why it was built that way. They carry memory that others do not. They understand patterns that are invisible from the outside. This understanding becomes justification. Authority rests with them not because they demand it, but because they know more. Their decisions appear wiser. Their outcomes last longer. People accept this. At first, the separation feels practical. Someone must oversee. Someone must decide. Someone must remember what others forget. The texts do not describe resistance here. They describe adaptation. The system continues to function smoothly. But separation creates hierarchy. Once authority belongs to a distinct group, distance becomes part of the structure. Decisions come from above rather than among. Explanation becomes optional. Imagine receiving an instruction that no longer needs to be justified. It works. That is enough. The Anunnaki are named more clearly now, not as planners alone, but as a class apart. Their authority is not situational. It is inherent. The text suggests that this authority is preserved through lineage. Not all knowledge is taught. Some is inherited. Roles are passed down. Responsibility remains within the same line. This is where the idea of hybridization appears. The Anunnaki are described as neither fully divine nor fully human. Their blood carries authority. Their presence legitimizes rule. This distinction is not emphasized emotionally. It is stated calmly. Hybrid does not mean unstable here. It means intentional. The ruling class is designed to sit between worlds, close enough to humanity to govern, close enough to origin to justify authority. This design feels deliberate. Perhaps this is why later texts describe rulers as descendants of gods. Not metaphorically, structurally. Their right to rule is inherited rather than earned. The land continues its cycles. Rivers flood and recede. Fields grow. Cities expand. From the outside, life improves. Inside, power consolidates. The separation grows clearer. Over generations. Rulers do not work the fields. They do not carry tools. Their role is decision. Their burden is continuity. The people accept this because stability persists. The system still works. But acceptance does not mean equality. The texts do not describe cruelty here. They describe distance, a growing gap between those who decide and those who act. Imagine watching someone give instructions without sharing the reason. There is no anger, only quiet awareness. Authority has become inherited. This inheritance changes how power is perceived. Leadership no longer rotates. It remains within the same line. The The system feels permanent. Perhaps this is why the Anunnaki are remembered so strongly. Their role is not temporary, it defines the structure itself. The hybrid class stands above daily life, but below the gods. They govern not as participants, but as managers of human activity. The sky remains unchanged. Stars move slowly overhead. From that scale, human hierarchy is brief, but within society it feels ancient already. The Sumerian texts do not pause to judge this, they record it. Authority is no longer something that emerges, it is something that exists, and once authority exists independently of agreement, challenge becomes unthinkable. The separation has succeeded. The ruling class now stands apart. Their legitimacy is preserved through blood, memory, and structure. The system holds, but permanence brings consequence. Once authority is inherited, it resists change. Adaptation slows, distance grows, the texts grow quieter again. They don't announce what follows. They allow time to pass. The land remains patient. The sky watches. And within the structure of civilization, the hybrid race, designed to preserve order, now holds power that feels unquestionable, rooted in origin rather than consent. From here, the story will move toward outcome, not collapse yet, not rebellion, but tension. The kind that grows when power lasts too long without renewal, and when a system built for stability begins to strain under its own permanence. That strain has not broken anything yet, but it is there, waiting. Nothing changes on the surface at first. The fields are still planted, the canals still carry water, the cities continue to grow. If you were living there, your days might feel much the same as they did before. Work begins at dawn, tasks are repeated, seasons pass. From the outside, stability has been achieved, but beneath that stability, something has settled into place. Rule is no longer temporary. The Sumerian text suggests that once the hybrid rulers take their position, authority stops moving. It no longer shifts with circumstance or ability. It stays where it is placed. Generation after generation, the same line remains at the centre. Imagine a child born into this ruling class. From the beginning, their path is clear. They are taught differently, protected differently, spoken to differently. Their future is assumed long before they understand it. This is new. Leadership is no longer something that arises. It is something that is inherited. The people accept this quietly, not because they are forced to, but because the system works. Crops grow, order holds. Disruption feels risky when stability is visible. Perhaps this is why no resistance appears in the text at first. When life improves, questions grow softer. The hybrid rulers do not appear cruel. They do not terrorize. They govern through distance rather than violence. Their authority feels natural because it has always been there, as far back as memory reaches. The texts describe kingship emerging here, but not as ambition, as continuation. Kings do not claim power, they receive it. Rule is said to descend. This language matters. Power is framed as something given, not taken. Authority comes from origin, not conquest. This framing removes blame from those who hold it. If power is inherited, then questioning it feels like questioning nature itself. The sky reinforces this idea. Stars return to the same places. The sun rises without permission. Cycles repeat. Order feels built into the world. The rulers mirror this constancy. Imagine standing in a public space as a ruler passes by. There is no display, no command shouted. People step aside automatically, not from fear, from habit. This habit shapes identity. Over time, people stop imagining alternatives. Children grow up knowing who rules. The structure becomes part of the landscape, like the river or the sky. The hybrid rulers maintain distance carefully. They do not share daily labour. They do not expose vulnerability. Their separation preserves authority. This separation is quiet, but complete. The texts do not describe open resentment. They describe silence, acceptance, a sense that this is simply how the world is arranged. But silence can carry pressure. Imagine working year after year under rules you did not help create. The rules are fair enough, life continues, but the reason behind them feels unreachable. Understanding fades, compliance remains. The rulers do not notice this shift immediately. From their position, order is intact, systems function, stability endures, there is no signal to change. Perhaps this is the danger of permanent rule. When authority no longer moves, it no longer listens as closely. The Sumerian texts begin to hint at this without stating it directly. Records grow formal, rituals become fixed, flexibility narrows. The system still works, but it no longer adapts easily. The land continues its cycles. Floods still come. Sometimes timing shifts. Sometimes damage is greater than expected. Recovery takes longer. Instead of adjustment, responses become ritualized. The same solutions are applied even when conditions differ. This rigidity is subtle. It does not feel like failure yet. It feels like tradition. The hybrid rulers rely on inherited knowledge. They trust what has always worked. Innovation slows. Perhaps this is why distance grows between rulers and land. Decisions are made from structures rather than from fields. The feel of soil is replaced by records and reports. Authority becomes abstract. The sky remains unchanged. Stars follow their paths. From that scale, human rigidity is insignificant. But within society it matters. Once rule becomes permanent, responsibility shifts. Failure is no longer personal, it becomes systemic. Correction becomes difficult because authority cannot admit error without weakening itself. The texts do not describe rebellion at this stage. They describe endurance. People endure, the system endures, tension builds quietly. The hybrid race was created to preserve order, and for a time, it does. But preservation is not the same as renewal. Order lasts, balance strains. The rulers remain above daily life, secure in inherited legitimacy. The people continue their work, living inside systems that feel unchangeable. Perhaps this is why later stories begin to change tone. Once permanence settles in, consequence begins to gather. The land remains patient. The sky watches. And within the quiet stability of inherited rule, something small begins to shift. An awareness that order without renewal carries its own risk, and that even systems designed to rule forever must eventually face the weight of time. That weight has not fallen yet, but it is there, waiting. At its height, the system feels complete. The cities are larger now, streets follow patterns. Storage rooms are full after good seasons. Temples rise slowly, one layer at a time, built to last longer than the people who place each brick. Imagine walking through the city just after sunrise. The air is cool. The ground beneath your feet is smooth from years of movement. Doors open quietly. Work begins without instruction because everyone already knows their place. This is life beneath the hybrid order. Nothing feels chaotic. Nothing feels rushed. The rulers are present, but distant. Their decisions shape daily life, yet they are rarely seen. Authority moves through messengers, records and ritual rather than voice. People adapt to this easily. Children learn early where they belong. Some are taught to work the land, others to manage goods. A few are trained for record keeping, taught symbols pressed into clay, learning how memory is stored outside the body. This knowledge is respected. Not everyone has access to it. Imagine a young scribe sitting quietly in the shade. The clay is cool and damp in their hands. Each mark must be precise. Errors matter. What is written here will outlast the speaker. Writing becomes power without force. The hybrid rulers rely on this system. They do not need to speak often. The structure speaks for them. Rules exist before anyone questions them. Daily life flows smoothly within these boundaries. Markets open at the same time each day. Goods are measured carefully. Disputes are settled according to precedent rather than emotion. Fairness feels procedural. Perhaps this is comforting. When outcomes are predictable, fear softens. People know what to expect. They may not love the rules, but they understand them. The land continues to provide when timing is right. Irrigation systems work well. Harvests are recorded, surplus is stored. From the outside, this looks like success. The Sumerian texts describe this period without drama. They show a society that functions efficiently. Labour is organised, authority is stable, memory is preserved. The hybrid rulers appear as caretakers of balance. They maintain order rather than disrupt it. Their role feels justified because results are visible. Imagine standing near a temple courtyard at midday. The stone is warm beneath your hand. Shadows fall evenly. The space feels calm. People move with purpose, not urgency. Above, the sky remains vast and unchanged. The same stars will return tonight, just as they always have. This continuity reinforces the sense that the system is aligned with something larger. Perhaps this is why obedience feels natural. When human order mirrors the sky's repetition, it feels correct. Ritual plays an important role here. Festivals mark time. Offerings are made not out of fear, but out of maintenance. The world must be kept in balance. The hybrid rulers stand at the centre of these rituals. They do not claim divinity, but they act as intermediaries. Their position between origin and humanity is reinforced through ceremony. This reinforces legitimacy without explanation. People participate willingly. Ritual provides rhythm. It breaks the year into manageable parts. Life feels structured rather than overwhelming, but structure always limits movement. Imagine wanting to change something small, a work pattern, a distribution rule. The system does not resist openly, but it does not respond quickly either. Change requires approval. Approval takes time. Most people adjust instead. The hybrid rulers remain removed from this friction. Their role is not to feel inconvenience, but to preserve continuity. From their perspective, stability matters more than comfort. This perspective shapes decisions. The Sumerian texts do not accuse, they observe. They show how distance grows naturally when responsibility is concentrated. The rulers rely on inherited knowledge. They trust systems that have worked before. Innovation becomes rare, not because it is forbidden, but because it is unnecessary, until it is needed. For now, the system holds. Cities grow outward, trade expands, influence spreads. Other groups observe and adopt similar structures. The model proves effective. Hybrid authority becomes the standard. The sky continues unchanged. Stars trace familiar paths. From that scale, the rise of cities is brief. But for the people living here, this feels like the world as it should be. Perhaps some feel constrained. Perhaps others feel protected. Both can exist at once. As the night continues around you, imagine this world resting in its peak. Order established. Authority accepted. Life flowing smoothly inside carefully built systems. The hybrid rulers have achieved what they were designed to do. They rule without chaos. They govern without constant force. But beneath this success, something subtle remains unresolved. Because systems built to last often forget how to change. And as history continues its slow movement forward, the question will no longer be whether order works, but whether it can adapt when the world shifts again. That question waits quietly, just beyond the edge of stability. Over time, comfort settles in. Not the kind that relaxes the body, but the kind that dulls curiosity. When systems work, people stop asking how they came to be. They focus on living inside them. Imagine another generation growing up under this order. Children learn rules before they learn reasons. They memorize boundaries the way they memorize paths through the city. The structure feels as natural as the river. This is the quiet cost of stability. The Sumerian texts do not describe sudden suffering here. They describe predictability. Life moves forward without sharp edges, and because there is little pain, there is little questioning. But something subtle begins to fade. Understanding. People know what to do, but not why. Ritual continues, but meaning thins. Actions repeat even when the reason behind them feels distant. Perhaps this feels easier. Knowing less can feel lighter. The hybrid rulers maintain the system with care. They oversee storage, labour, ritual and record. They ensure continuity. From their position, the system appears healthy. They do not see what has been lost because it is not visible. Curiosity does not leave marks. Questions do not break walls. The city continues to grow. Trade increases. Influence spreads outward. Other communities adopt similar structures. Authority modelled on hybrid lineage becomes familiar across regions. This success reinforces confidence. Why change something that works? Imagine standing in a gathering space as a decree is announced. The words are clear. The reason is not given. No one asks. The outcome is accepted because it fits within expectation. This is not fear. It is habit. Habit shapes behaviour more quietly than force ever could. The Sumerian text suggests that as authority becomes routine, human participation shifts. People stop seeing themselves as part of decision-making. They become part of execution instead. Work remains meaningful but bounded. Responsibility narrows. Initiative fades where it is not required. Perhaps this is not noticed at first. When life is stable, the absence of choice can feel like relief. The land continues its cycles. Floods still arrive. When they are manageable, the system handles them well. When they are not, the response is slower. Rules cannot feel the land. They can only apply what has worked before. Imagine a season where water lingers longer than expected. Fields remain wet. Crops struggle. The response follows precedent. Adjustments are minimal. The system trusts itself. Recovery takes longer. No one panics, but no one adapts quickly either. The hybrid rulers rely on inherited knowledge. They were taught what worked in the past. That knowledge has served them well, but change does not announce itself clearly. It arrives quietly, gradually, almost politely. The texts do not describe blame here. They show limitation. Authority that cannot question itself loses sensitivity. The rulers are not cruel, they are distant. Their decisions remain logical, but logic alone cannot feel shifts in soil, wind, or timing. Distance grows between rule and reality. Imagine a ruler receiving reports rather than standing in the field. The numbers look acceptable. The damage feels manageable, but something in the ground has changed. The system responds too late. The sky remains unchanged. Stars move in familiar patterns. From that scale, small delays are meaningless. But for those living through them, delay matters. The people do not rebel. They adjust their expectations. Loss becomes part of routine. Endurance replaces participation. This endurance is praised. The texts record patience as virtue, obedience as stability, adaptation as loyalty. Perhaps this is how tension hides, not as conflict, as quiet narrowing. The hybrid rulers continue to govern. They preserve order as designed. Their legitimacy remains unquestioned because no alternative is visible. The idea of change feels risky. The system feels older than anyone alive. To question it feels unnatural. Memory stretches back only so far. Beyond it lies myth. This is where stories begin to shift tone. Not suddenly, not dramatically. They grow more distant, less personal, more symbolic. The Anunnaki move further from daily life, becoming figures of origin rather than participants. As they recede into story, authority becomes abstract. The people follow systems without seeing their makers. This separation matters. Once authority becomes invisible, accountability fades. Decisions feel inevitable rather than chosen. Responsibility dissolves into structure. The Sumerian texts do not say this is wrong. They show it as consequence. Systems built for order eventually replace understanding with routine. The land continues to move beneath it all. Rivers shift slowly. Climate changes subtly. Conditions evolve whether systems do or not. For a time, order holds, but strain accumulates quietly. As the night deepens around you, imagine this world resting inside its success. Stable, organized, predictable. And beneath that calm surface, imagine small changes going unnoticed. Soil thinning, water timing shifting, memory narrowing. Nothing breaks yet. But the cost of order has begun to collect, not loudly, not suddenly, patiently, waiting for the moment when stability meets a world that no longer behaves as expected. At first, the silence feels peaceful. The system continues to work, orders are followed, rituals are observed. Life moves forward with few disruptions. From a distance, everything appears calm, but silence can mean different things. Imagine walking through the city at dawn. The streets are clean, the air is cool, people move with purpose, but without conversation. Everyone knows what to do, no one asks why. This is silence born from certainty. The Sumerian texts begin to feel different here. The tone shifts slightly. Descriptions become less detailed. The rulers appear less often in daily scenes. Their presence is still felt but rarely seen. They have moved upward, not into the sky, into abstraction. Authority no longer needs explanation. It exists on its own. Decisions are issued through layers of structure. Scribes, officials, ritual leaders. By the time a choice reaches the people, it feels distant and final. Imagine hearing a new rule announced without context. It fits the system. It does not shock. You accept it because everything else depends on acceptance. This is where silence deepens. People stop speaking upward. Questions feel unnecessary. Feedback feels irrelevant. The system does not ask for input, so none is offered. The hybrid rulers remain insulated. They rely on reports, records, and ceremony. They trust what is written more than what is felt. Numbers replace experience. This is efficient, but efficiency removes texture. The land begins to change in small ways. Rain patterns shift slightly. Floods arrive earlier or later than expected. Soil behaves differently than it once did. These changes are subtle. They do not demand immediate response. The system continues as designed. Imagine a canal that once carried water perfectly, now filling with silt a little faster each year. Maintenance follows schedule, not need. The canal still works, but not as well. No alarm sounds. The texts do not describe panic. They describe delay. The hybrid rulers are not indifferent. They simply do not feel urgency. From their position, the system still holds. Losses are manageable. Adjustments can wait. Distance creates patience. Patience creates delay. The people living closer to the land feel the difference sooner. Crops struggle in small ways. Work requires more effort. Recovery takes longer, but the structure does not change. Silence grows between experience and decision. Imagine wanting to speak, then deciding not to. Not out of fear, out of habit. The system has never asked for your voice, so you no longer offer it. This is not oppression. It is quiet removal. The Sumerian texts do not accuse the rulers here. They simply note the widening gap. The Anunnaki become figures of law rather than life. Their role is to preserve order, not to feel its strain. Perhaps this is the cost of design. Systems created to last do not feel change easily. They resist adjustment because adjustment threatens stability. The sky remains unchanged. Stars follow their paths. From that scale, small delays are meaningless. But on the ground, timing matters. When planting is delayed even slightly, yield changes. When water arrives out of season, damage spreads. The system responds but slowly. Rules are applied evenly, not wisely. Imagine a solution that once worked being repeated out of habit. It is not wrong, it is just no longer enough. The hybrid rulers trust precedent. Precedent has served them well. Questioning it feels unnecessary. Silence continues. Over time, rituals grow heavier, more formal, less flexible. They preserve tradition rather than respond to condition. The meaning behind them fades further. People perform actions without understanding their origin. Understanding becomes optional. Obedience remains required. The texts suggest that at this stage the Anunnaki withdraw further from daily involvement. Their presence becomes symbolic. They appear in stories more than in action. Authority remains, but connection weakens. This distance changes how power is perceived. It no longer feels human, it feels fixed, like the sky or the river. Questioning it feels pointless. Perhaps this is why later generations describe the rulers as gods rather than planners. Distance transforms memory. The land continues to change quietly. Climate shifts over long cycles. The system adapts slowly, sometimes too slowly. No collapse happens yet, just accumulation. The people adjust. They work harder. They endure more. Stability becomes effortful rather than natural. The rulers remain secure. Their authority is still unquestioned. Their legitimacy still rooted in origin and blood. Silence protects them. The Sumerian texts do not dramatize this phase. They let it pass quietly. Time moves forward without announcement. This is important. Major change does not always arrive as disaster. Sometimes it arrives as quiet mismatch between system and reality. As the night settles around you, imagine this world holding together through habit rather than understanding. Order maintained through repetition rather than awareness. Everything still stands, but the silence has deepened, and silence, when it stretches too far, begins to hide what needs attention most. The system has not failed, but it has stopped listening, and that, in time, will matter. Over time, presence fades before it disappears. The rulers are still named, their authority is still invoked, their symbols remain carved into stone and pressed into clay. But the living connection between ruler and land grows thin. Imagine walking past a temple wall at dusk. The carvings are worn smooth by generations of touch. You know the names engraved there. You've heard them since childhood, but you've never seen the beings they refer to. This is memory without presence. The Sumerian texts begin to rely more heavily on lists, lineages, and origin stories here. Names matter more than actions. Descent matters more than decision. Authority is justified by where it comes from, not what it does. This is a shift. Earlier, power was maintained through observation and adjustment. Now it is maintained through remembrance, through repetition of origin stories, through ritual that points backward rather than outward. Perhaps this feels comforting. When the present feels uncertain, memory can feel solid. The hybrid rulers are no longer active planners in daily life. Their role has moved into structure. They exist through law, ritual, and inherited position. Their authority is constant even when their involvement is not. The system still functions, but it functions on memory rather than awareness. Imagine a rule followed because it has always been followed. No one recalls why it began. It is repeated because repetition itself feels safe. The land continues to change slowly. Rivers shift their paths over decades. Soil composition changes with use. Weather patterns drift. Memory does not notice these changes easily. Presence would. The people living closest to the land feel the strain first. They adjust where they can. They compensate quietly. But the system they live inside does not change shape easily. Rules are applied evenly. Circumstances are not. The Sumerian texts do not describe anger here. They describe endurance. The people adapt to the system rather than the system adapting to them. The hybrid rulers remain elevated. Their lineage continues. Their legitimacy remains unquestioned because it is ancient. Ancient things feel correct simply because they have lasted. Perhaps this is why questioning feels unnecessary. The sky remains unchanged. Stars rise and set as they always have. From that scale, human systems are brief. But memory mistakes duration for alignment. Because something has lasted does not mean it still fits. The texts grow quieter about decision-making. They focus more on ritual precision. Correct words, correct timing, correct form. Form replaces function. Imagine a ceremony performed perfectly. Even as the outcome weakens, the ritual is correct. The result is not. No one calls this failure. It is called misfortune. Responsibility shifts away from decision-makers and into fate. The hybrid rulers are not blamed. Their role is no longer active enough to be accountable. They are remembered rather than involved. This distance changes how power feels. Power becomes untouchable. The people no longer imagine speaking upward. The rulers no longer imagine listening downward. Communication dissolves into structure. Silence thickens. The Sumerian texts suggest that at this stage, the Anunnaki retreat further into myth. Their actions are no longer recorded in detail. Their names become titles. Their presence becomes symbolic. They are remembered as origin rather than influence. This transformation is quiet. It is not announced. It happens over generations as memory replaces experience. The land continues its cycles. Floods still come. Droughts still happen. The system responds slowly, repeating known solutions. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Loss increases gradually. Recovery takes longer. Endurance becomes a virtue praised more than adaptability. People survive within the system, but they no longer shape it. The hybrid rulers remain unchanged. Their authority feels fixed in time, untouched by present conditions. This is where tension deepens, not as conflict, as mismatch. The system preserves itself beautifully, but preservation is not the same as responsiveness. The sky watches silently. Stars remain steady. From that scale, human rigidity is invisible, but within the city, life grows heavier. The Sumerian texts do not conclude here. They pause, they leave space. They allow this phase to linger without resolution, because this is not yet collapse, it is accumulation. Memory has replaced presence. Authority has replaced relationship. Stability has replaced awareness. The system still stands, but it no longer feels alive. As the night deepens around you, imagine this world resting inside its own history. Strong, enduring, certain, and beneath that certainty, imagine small signals being missed, changes going unnoticed, opportunities for adjustment passing quietly. Nothing has broken, yet, but the story has reached a turning point. From here, the questions will no longer be about how authority was created, but about what happens when authority outlives its connection to the world it governs. Those questions remain. waiting, patiently. When memory becomes structure, meaning begins to sink beneath the surface. The Sumerian texts grow quieter about action, but richer in symbol. What once described planning and governance now speaks in images of descent, of bloodlines, of beings who move between realms. The words remain calm, the tone never sharpens. Imagine holding a clay tablet in low light. The surface is uneven. Your fingers trace shallow marks pressed by someone long gone. The signs are careful, deliberate. They were meant to last. These texts do not explain themselves. They describe events without instruction. They preserve stories, without interpretation. What lies beneath is not stated directly. It must be noticed slowly. Perhaps that is intentional. One recurring idea appears again and again, the mixing of lines. The joining of what is above with what is below, not framed as romance, not framed as transgression, framed as function. Blood in these texts is not emotional, it is structural. Lineage determines role. Descent carries authority. The hybrid nature of rulers is repeated not for drama, but for legitimacy. Power flows through inheritance the same way water flows through canals, quietly, reliably. Imagine a ruler performing a ritual at dawn. The movements are exact. The words are ancient. The meaning is not questioned. The ritual affirms that order still holds because origin still holds. The sky above remains unchanged. Stars trace familiar paths. Some alignments matter more than others. Certain nights are marked, certain days chosen. Time itself becomes symbolic. Astronomy does not dominate these texts loudly. It sits quietly in the background. The moon's phases guide ritual. The sun's return marks renewal. The stars confirm continuity. Perhaps this is how authority feels eternal. When rule mirrors the sky, it feels natural. The hybrid rulers stand between realms, not physically but symbolically. They connect origin with present order. Their bloodline links planning with execution, memory with structure. This is not hidden in the texts. It is simply not emphasized. Modern readers often expect warnings or explanations. The Sumerian texts offer neither. They describe what is, not how to feel about it. Perhaps they assumed understanding would come naturally. Beneath the surface of the stories, another layer exists, one that speaks of design rather than accident, of intention rather than emergence. What if authority was not just preserved, but engineered? The texts do not answer this directly. They do not deny it either. They describe processes that feel deliberate without naming them as such. Hybridization appears not as chaos but as solution, a ruling class designed to last, to remain consistent, to reduce uncertainty. Silence surrounds this idea. The land continues to change slowly. Climate shifts over long spans. Conditions evolve. The system holds because it was built to resist change. Resistance feels like strength, until adaptation is required. The hybrid rulers preserve order through continuity rather than response. Their bloodline anchors authority in origin rather than present condition. This anchoring feels secure, but anchors also prevent movement. Imagine a structure built to withstand storms by remaining rigid. It holds through many seasons. But when the ground beneath it shifts, rigidity becomes risk. The Sumerian texts do not describe this outcome yet. They linger on symbolism, on ritual, on lineage. They let time pass. Modern archaeology adds another layer of silence. Excavations uncover temples aligned with celestial events, foundations laid with precision, records kept with care. Nothing suggests improvisation. Everything suggests design. Perhaps this is why the Anunnaki later become gods in memory. Distance transforms planners into deities. Function turns into myth. The hybrid rulers are no longer remembered for what they did, but for what they were. Between realms, between origins, between humanity and something else. The texts allow this transformation without comment. They do not insist we believe. They do not insist we dismiss. They simply remain. The stars still rise, the land still shifts, the stories still wait. As the night continues around you, imagine these layers resting quietly together. History on the surface, symbol beneath, intention beneath that. No answers demanded, no conclusions drawn. Just a sense that beneath the stories we tell ourselves, there may be structures older than memory, still shaping how authority feels, how power moves, and why some systems seem to outlast the people. Living inside them, that possibility remains. Quiet, unresolved, waiting beneath the surface. Some meanings are not spoken, they are placed. The Sumerian builders did not explain everything they did. They arranged space instead. They aligned structures. They marked time through position rather than instruction. What mattered was not said out loud. It was built into the world. Imagine standing near a temple just before dawn. The stone is cool beneath your hand. The air feels still. As light begins to rise, the upper edges catch the sun first, glowing softly while the lower levels remain in shadow. This was not accidental. Archaeology shows that many structures were positioned with care. Entrances face specific directions. Courtyards open towards certain horizons. The movement of the sun and moon mattered. Time was observed, not chased. The sky served as reference. The stars moved slowly, predictably, their return reassured. When earthly order mirrored celestial rhythm, authority felt anchored to something vast and unchanging. Perhaps this is why rulers tied themselves to the heavens, not to impress, to legitimize. When power aligns with the sky, it feels unquestionable. The hybrid rulers appear again here, not directly but through placement. Their authority is reinforced by environment. Temples act as reminders. Ritual spaces create repetition. Every movement through the city reinforces hierarchy. Stone teaches without words. Imagine walking the same path each day, passing the same elevated structure. You look up without thinking. The body learns before the mind does. This learning becomes automatic. The Sumerian texts mention observations of the moon, the sun, and bright wandering stars. These observations guide calendars, festivals, and timing of work. But they also guide legitimacy. Rituals occur when the sky confirms them. Authority feels confirmed by nature itself. Perhaps this is why resistance never gains language. How do you argue with the sky? Silence supports this system. Stillness reinforces it. The slower things move, the more permanent they feel. Modern excavation reveals layers beneath these structures. Foundations built over earlier foundations. Each generation adds weight. Each rebuild deepens permanence. Change is layered, not replaced. This layering mirrors lineage. Hybrid bloodlines continue beneath ritual surfaces. Authority is passed quietly, wrapped in ceremony rather than announcement. Power remains stable because it is expected to remain so. Expectation is powerful. Imagine a child growing up surrounded by symbols they do not question. The temple is simply there. The ruler simply rules. The system simply exists. This is how belief forms without instruction. The sky remains unchanged. Stars rise and fall, centuries pass, the alignment holds. From that scale, human lives feel brief. Perhaps this is why time mattered so deeply to the Sumerians. Measuring it, recording it, aligning with it. When time is understood, power feels justified. The hybrid rulers do not need to argue their position. Their existence is woven into time itself. But stone also erodes, slowly, patiently. Foundations shift, alignments drift. Climate changes imperceptibly over generations. What once fit perfectly begins to strain. The system responds with more ritual, more precision, more emphasis on correctness. Form tightens as function weakens. The texts do not dramatize this. They let it happen quietly. They allow silence to deepen. Modern readers see intention where ancient writers saw necessity. We look back and search for meaning. They looked forward and preserved order. Perhaps both are true. The signs written in sky and stone remain. We can still measure them. We can still observe alignments. We can still feel intention. But we cannot ask why. The builders are gone. The planners are memory. The rulers are story. Only placement remains. As the night continues around you, imagine these signs resting quietly in place. Stone, holding sky. Earth mirroring stars. Authority reinforced without words. No announcement, no explanation. Just structure. And beneath that structure, questions linger. Not loud enough to disturb the calm, but present enough to remind us that design does not prevent change. It only delays its recognition. The sky continues to move. Stone continues to weather. and somewhere between them, meaning waits, unchanged, patient, and unresolved. Some things are not hidden away, they are placed where no one thinks to look. The Sumerian texts do not speak loudly about control or intent. They do not warn, they do not confess. Instead, they describe systems as though they were natural, like rivers, seasons, or the slow turning of the sky. This is what makes them easy to overlook. Imagine reading a line pressed into clay thousands of years ago. The words are simple, calm, almost ordinary. There is no emphasis, no urgency. Yet within that calm language, entire structures of power are preserved. What is hidden is not secrecy. It is familiarity. The hybrid rulers are described as descendants, as inheritors, as intermediaries. These descriptions repeat so often that they fade into background. They become assumed rather than questioned. Perhaps this is the most effective kind of control. When something feels normal, it does not invite inspection. The texts describe lineage again and again. Who came from whom, who ruled after whom, the repetition feels factual. But repetition also reinforces belief. Authority is natural because it has always been there. Imagine growing up hearing the same names spoken with respect, seeing the same symbols carved above doorways, participating in rituals that confirm hierarchy without explanation. You do not need to be told why power exists. You feel it. The Sumerians did not separate myth from administration the way we do now. Stories explained systems. Systems reinforce stories. The two fed each other quietly. This blending hides intention. Hybridization appears not as scandal, but as necessity. The rulers are different because they must be. Their bloodline carries responsibility. Their distance preserves order. Nothing about this is presented as dangerous. Perhaps that is why it lasts. Modern archaeology uncovers structures beneath structures, records beneath records, evidence of careful planning repeated over centuries. Nothing suggests improvisation. Everything suggests continuity. Even technological choices reflect this. Tools are refined slowly, methods are preserved, change is incremental, sudden shifts are rare. The system prefers stability over innovation. Silence supports this preference. Stillness reinforces it. When change happens slowly, it does not feel like change at all. The sky above remains steady. The stars move predictably. Time feels anchored. From that perspective, authority appears timeless. Perhaps this is why the Anunnaki fade into the background of their own story. They become origin rather than presence. Their actions become assumption rather than event, hidden in plain sight. The texts do not tell us what to think about this. They do not warn future readers, they simply record. It is only much later that questions arise. Why did power remain so concentrated? Why did lineage matter more than ability? Why did authority resist adaptation? The answers are not written directly, but the patterns are. Hybrid rule is not about domination, it is about preservation, about keeping systems intact across time, about preventing collapse through rigidity. Rigid systems feel safe until conditions change. The land does not remain fixed. Rivers shift. Climate changes slowly. Soil composition alters over generations. These changes are subtle but relentless. The system responds with more structure, not flexibility. This response feels logical from within, but from a distance it reveals limitation. What was hidden was not conspiracy. It was assumption. The belief that order must be preserved exactly as it began. The belief that authority rooted in origin cannot be questioned. The belief that stability equals correctness. These beliefs do not announce themselves. They live quietly in repetition. Even today we recognize them. Institutions that outlast individuals. Rules followed because they exist. Power inherited rather than earned. The pattern repeats. The Sumerian texts do not claim this as truth. They show it unfolding. Perhaps they assumed future readers would notice. Perhaps they did not. As the night continues around you, imagine these assumptions resting quietly beneath ritual and record. Not hidden behind walls, but resting openly where no one thought to examine them. Authority that feels natural. Structure that feels eternal. Power that feels inherited. Nothing dramatic. Nothing secret. Just systems repeating themselves until they become invisible. And in that invisibility the greatest questions remain, unasked, unanswered, and quietly shaping the world long after the names of their creators have faded into clay and dust. Those questions still rest there, in plain sight, waiting. Every system leaves behind a question, not one written clearly, not one asked out loud, but one that returns quietly, again and again, even when everything seems settled. Imagine standing in the city long after the planners are gone. The temples still rise, the rules still hold, the rituals are still performed. On the surface, nothing appears broken, and yet, something lingers. The Sumerian texts do not ask this question directly. They circle it. They return to it through lists, through lineage, through repeated origin stories. They record succession carefully, as if reassurance is needed. Why does power stay where it is? Some scholars believe the answer lies in memory, that early societies feared collapse more than inequality. Stability mattered more than fairness. When a system worked, it was preserved at all costs. Others suggest the answer lies in trauma. Floods that erased whole regions. Seasons that failed without warning. In such a world, control felt like safety. Authority felt like protection. Perhaps both are true. There is also the question of belief. When rulers are described as part divine, part human, authority becomes sacred. Challenging it feels wrong, not just dangerous. Power gains moral weight. But belief does not explain everything. The texts show careful planning, deliberate separation, intentional lineage. These are not accidents of faith, they are designs. Some imagine that hybrid rule was the only way early systems could survive. A class removed enough to decide calmly, connected enough to govern effectively, stable enough to endure generations. Others wonder if this distance slowly created imbalance, if rulers no longer felt the land, if decision drifted from experience, if preservation replaced adaptation. The texts do not choose a side, they present patterns. Authority hardens, distance grows, ritual increases as flexibility decreases. Perhaps this is not a flaw, perhaps it is a phase. Every system begins close to life, then moves away from it, then either returns or collapses. We may never know which path the Sumerian system was on when these texts were written. Some believe the Anunnaki withdrew intentionally, that once systems were established, their presence was no longer needed. They became origin stories rather than active rulers. Others suggest they were absorbed into myth as memory blurred, that planners became gods because distance turned function into legend. Perhaps neither explanation is complete. What remains is the question of intent. Was hybrid rule meant to last forever, or was it meant to guide humanity through a phase of organization? The texts do not say, they do not warn future generations to dismantle the system. They do not encourage rebellion, they simply record what was. Perhaps that silence is the point. When authority is designed rather than earned, questioning it becomes difficult. When power is inherited rather than chosen, change feels unnatural. Yet history shows that no system remains unchanged forever. The land continues to move, the sky continues its cycles, time presses gently but constantly. The Sumerian system lasted a long time, longer than most human arrangements. That alone suggests effectiveness, but effectiveness is not permanence. The texts do not describe collapse in detail. They do not dramatize decline. They allow time to pass quietly, leaving gaps where answers might have been. Those gaps invite speculation. Some see evidence of tension, increased ritual, greater emphasis on lineage, less mention of adjustment. These may be signs of strain. Others see resilience, the ability to endure despite changing conditions, the persistence of order across centuries. Both readings can exist together. Perhaps the greatest question is not what the Anunnaki did, but what humans learned from it. Did we learn that order must be protected at all costs, or that systems must adapt to survive? The texts do not tell us. They leave us with pattern rather than instruction. As the night continues around you, imagine this question resting gently in the background, not demanding an answer, not insisting on resolution, just present. Like the stars above, repeating their paths without explanation. Like the river, moving forward whether or not it is understood. The question remains, not loud, not urgent, but steady. And perhaps that steadiness is enough. because some questions are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be carried quietly across time, reminding us that every system, no matter how carefully designed, must eventually listen again to the world it governs. Perhaps the story has been misunderstood, not because it was hidden, but because we tend to listen for drama where there was patience. The Sumerian texts do not describe the Anunnaki as tyrants. They do not describe humanity as trapped. They describe arrangement, structure, response to necessity. The tone remains calm even when the implications feel large. Imagine standing back and looking at the system as it first formed. Floods needed managing, labour needed organising, memory needed preserving. These were not abstract problems. They were immediate, physical, persistent. Perhaps hybrid rule was not about domination at all. Perhaps it was about continuity. Some scholars believe the idea of mixed lineage symbolised balance, a way of joining planning with participation, knowledge with effort, distance with responsibility, not superiority, but function. Others suggest the stories preserve a memory of transition, a time when leadership shifted from communal agreement to formal structure. The Anunnaki, in this view, represent systems rather than beings, roles rather than rulers. Maybe both readings are possible. The texts themselves never insist on a single meaning. They present relationships rather than conclusions. They show order forming, hardening, and persisting, without judgment. Perhaps that restraint matters. Imagine a society trying to explain why power feels inherited, why some people rule by birth, why obedience feels natural even when it limits choice. Stories give shape to what logic cannot soften. The Anunnaki become explanation. Blood becomes metaphor. Hybridization becomes structure. What if the story is less about beings entering humanity and more about authority entering memory? The land continues to shift quietly beneath these interpretations. Rivers change course over centuries, soil evolves, climate moves slowly, human systems respond imperfectly, the sky remains steady, stars return to familiar positions. From that scale, human explanations feel small, yet humans explain anyway. We tell stories to make sense of endurance, to justify why systems last longer than the people inside them, to explain why power does not reset with each generation. Perhaps the Anunnaki stories are not warnings or revelations, but mirrors. They reflect how humans understand hierarchy, how we accept structure when it reduces uncertainty, how we preserve systems that work even when they limit us. The texts do not demand belief, they offer context. Some believe the Anunnaki were remembered as gods because planners became distant. Distance turns management into myth. Function becomes divine when explanation fades. Others believe the stories preserve a deeper memory, one of intervention, design, and intention beyond human origin. They point to precision, alignment, and consistency as evidence. We may never know which is closer. Perhaps the truth sits somewhere between. The Sumerians did not separate symbolic from literal the way we do. Stories carried multiple meanings at once. A being could be both a god and a role. Blood could be both lineage and legitimacy. This flexibility allowed stories to last. Perhaps that is why they still speak. The system they describe eventually changed. Cities rose and fell, power shifted, names were forgotten, but the patterns remained. Authority inherited, structure preserved, change resisted. We see these patterns again and again across cultures and centuries. Maybe the Anunnaki story endures because it names something universal. Not aliens, not gods. But the moment when organization becomes authority, and authority becomes identity, the moment when systems outgrow the people who built them. The Sumerian texts do not resolve this. They allow ambiguity. They let questions remain open. Perhaps that openness is intentional. As the night deepens around you, imagine holding this possibility gently, not needing certainty, not seeking proof, just allowing the story to exist as it was meant to, a reflection, a record, a way of explaining why power feels older than memory. The Anunnaki may represent beings, or systems, or memories shaped into form. Whatever they were, their story reminds us that authority does not appear suddenly. It grows from need. It solidifies through repetition. It lasts through belief. And perhaps the most important lesson is not who ruled, but how quietly rule became normal. That quiet normalization is still with us, not as story, as structure. And as you rest here, listening without effort, that understanding can remain just that, an understanding. No urgency, no conclusion, just a gentle awareness that stories last because they describe patterns we continue to live inside. The question does not demand an answer tonight. It can rest, like the land beneath old cities, like the sky above ancient temples, patient, unresolved, waiting. Long after the cities softened back into soil, something stayed. Not walls, not rulers, not even names remembered clearly. What remained was pattern. The Sumerian world did not vanish all at once. It thinned, layers faded, authority shifted, languages changed. But the way power was understood, where it came from, how it passed forward, continued quietly, carried inside new systems. Imagine standing centuries later on ground where a temple once stood. The stones have been reused, the outline is gone, but the orientation remains. The land still slopes the same way, the river still passes nearby. Memory does not always preserve detail, it preserves direction. The Sumerian texts survived in fragments, broken tablets, partial lines, lists without stories attached. Yet even in this incomplete form, they carried something intact. They carried explanation. Why kings ruled by descent, why authority felt older than any living person, why systems outlasted individuals. When later cultures encountered these ideas, they did not reject them. They absorbed them, modified them, renamed them. Kings became chosen by gods. Lineage became destiny. Order became sacred. The Anunnaki faded into background myth, but their function remained. Authority continued to be framed as inherited rather than negotiated. Systems were preserved because they worked, until they didn't. Archaeologists uncover evidence slowly. Foundations beneath foundations. Records of administration. Evidence of planning that stretched far beyond a single lifetime. Nothing rushed. Nothing improvised. This kind of design leaves long shadows. Even now we organize ourselves around structures that feel inevitable. Institutions that existed before us. Rules we follow without remembering their origin. Authority that feels natural simply because it has always been there. Perhaps this is the true legacy. Not beings from the sky, not hybrid bloodlines, but the idea that order should be permanent. The Sumerian texts do not tell us what to do with this legacy. They do not instruct future generations to repeat or reject it. They simply leave it behind. Modern study adds context, but not certainty. We can translate words, measure alignments, date layers of soil. But intent remains elusive. Was the system meant to endure forever? Or only until humanity learned to? Manage itself, we may never know. What we do know is that the patterns repeat. Across cultures, across centuries, authority concentrates, distance grows, systems stabilize, flexibility fades, then change comes. Sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. The Sumerians experienced this too. Their cities eventually declined, power shifted, new systems replaced old ones. The Anunnaki did not return to correct or restore. The world moved on, and yet, the idea of inherited authority remained. This is not failure, it is continuity. The land continues its cycles, the sky remains steady. Stars rise and fall as they did thousands of years ago. From that scale, human systems are brief experiments, but they matter to those living inside them. The Sumerian texts remind us that order is something humans create to manage uncertainty. When it works, we preserve it. When it strains, we ritualize it. When it fails, we explain it through story. Those stories endure. Perhaps that is why you're listening now. Not to find answers, but to notice patterns. To recognize how deeply the past still shapes the present. The Anunnaki may never be fully understood, but the systems described in their stories feel familiar. They live on, in institutions, in traditions, in assumptions passed forward without question. As the night continues around you, imagine this legacy resting quietly within us all. Not heavy, not demanding, just present. A reminder that history does not disappear. It softens, it adapts, it becomes background. And in that background, it continues to shape how we live, how we organize, and how we understand power. long after the names of those who first imagined it have returned to dust. The story does not end, it settles. And from that settling something gentle remains, an awareness that every system we inherit once began as an answer to a problem, and every system we live inside will one day become a story told quietly without urgency to someone listening in the dark, just like this. And now, we can let the story rest. The night around you has continued while we listened. Time moved forward gently. Nothing needed your attention. Nothing asked you to decide. Here, in the present moment, everything is simple again. Feel where your body is supported. Notice the quiet around you. Let the last thoughts soften on their own. Long ago the land rested like this too. After voices faded, after footsteps disappeared, after walls returned to soil, the rivers kept moving, the sky stayed open, the stars watched without comment. They still do. Whatever the Anunnaki were, beings, symbols, systems, they no longer act. Their stories remain, pressed into clay and memory, waiting patiently to be noticed. Not solved, not proven, just noticed. The stones that once formed temples lie scattered now. Wind moves across them, sand settles into their cracks. Silence gathers gently. Nothing is lost here. The questions remain, but they no longer ask for answers. They rest the way the land rests, holding everything without urgency. Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the value of these stories is not in what they reveal, but in how they remind us to move slowly, to notice patterns, to accept that some things last longer than explanation. The stars overhead are the same ones seen by people who lived beneath hybrid rulers, beneath kings, beneath systems that felt eternal. Those stars did not change when authority rose. They did not change when it fell. They remain. And as you rest here, listening without effort, you are part of that continuity too. Another moment passing quietly beneath the same sky. Nothing more is required. The wind continues, the land breathes, the night deepens, and somewhere between thought and sleep the ancient world grows quiet again. Not as history, not as mystery, but as presence, still, patient, enduring. The story has said all it needs to say. Now, it can fade.